She was blind and sang on the streets until a billionaire approached and whispered, "Your voice is the most beautiful thing I've heard in years." Katherine Holland knew exactly how many steps it took to get there. 37 from the building's door to the corner, 52 more to the lamppost railing where she positioned herself every morning. She counted each one, not out of fear of getting lost, but because that silent counting was her way of keeping control over a world she could no longer see. Her cane brushed against the ground in a steady rhythm, almost musical, and when her fingers finally touched the cold metal of the post, she took a deep breath. "Here I am," she thought, "ready for the day." Nashville woke slowly that autumn morning. The air carried the smell of freshly brewed coffee from nearby cafes, mixed with the damp scent of fallen leaves on the sidewalks. Katherine adjusted the shawl over her shoulders and placed the felt hat on the ground in front of her. It wasn't much, it never was, but every coin that landed there represented more than money. It represented connection. Someone had stopped, someone had listened, and for her, that meant her voice still mattered, even when the world insisted on treating her as invisible. She closed her eyes, an unnecessary gesture but comforting, and let the first note escape. It was always a gospel song, always something that spoke of faith, of hope, of a love greater than circumstances. Her voice rose up the facades of old buildings, glided between the hurried conversations of passers-by, and for a few minutes, that ordinary corner turned into something sacred. Katherine didn't sing to impress. She sang because it was the only thing that still made her feel whole. But the truth, the one she kept buried deep, where not even Riley could reach, was that there were days when loneliness weighed more than faith. Days when she finished singing and realized no one had stopped, no one had left a coin, no one had truly listened. And on those days, Katherine went home with an empty hat and a tight chest, questioning whether it was still worth insisting, whether it was still worth believing that her voice had enough power to break through people's indifference. The morning moved forward, and with it came familiar sounds. The clatter of rushed heels on the pavement, the rumble of buses passing by, the distant bell from the church 2 blocks ahead. Katherine knew that urban symphony by heart, or would it be by sound? She smiled at her own thought. Each noise was a coordinate on the invisible map she built daily. And in the middle of all that chaos, her voice was the only thing she could truly offer. The only thing that didn't depend on eyes to exist. When the sun began to warm the skin on her face, Katherine knew it was almost noon. Time for a break. She crouched carefully and felt around the hat. A few coins, a crumpled bill, enough to help Riley with lunch, maybe. She tucked everything into her coat pocket and stayed there, sitting on the cold ground, listening to the city continue without her. Does anyone really hear? The question always came, silent and insistent, like a shadow she couldn't shake off. And then, without warning, it started to rain. A fine drizzle, almost tender, wetting slowly. Katherine didn't move. Instead, she tilted her face upward and let the drops touch her skin. There was something liberating about it. The rain didn't see her as blind. The rain didn't feel sorry. The rain just fell, democratic and honest. She settled herself again by the post, took a deep breath, and began to sing once more. This time, with more intensity. This time, as if she were talking directly to God. And somewhere between one note and another, she didn't notice, but someone had stopped. And for the first time in a long while, someone was truly listening. Luke Murphy wasn't in the habit of stopping. His life was a timed sequence of meetings, decisions, and numbers that needed to add up. That afternoon, he was leaving yet another one of those frustrating meetings, the kind that drains your soul and leaves a bitter taste in your mouth. Record profits, international expansion, new contracts, everything perfect on paper, everything hollow in his chest. He loosened his tie as he walked down the wet sidewalk, feeling the fine drizzle seep through the expensive fabric of his suit. And that's when he heard it. A voice. Not just any voice, that voice. He stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, and a woman in high heels nearly bumped into him, muttering something about people standing in the way. Luke didn't even move. The voice cut through the rain, the honking horns, the constant noise of the city. It was pure, visceral. There was something about it that sounded like truth, something he hadn't heard in years, maybe decades. He turned his face toward the sound and saw her, sitting by a lamppost, eyes closed, simple clothes soaked through, singing as if the entire world depended on that song. And maybe it did. Luke stood there, motionless as the rain ran down his face. He didn't know how much time passed. It could have been a minute. It could have been 10. Time lost all meaning. All that existed was that melody rising to the heavens, carrying with it a faith he'd forgotten was possible to feel. When the last note finally dissolved into the air, he realized he'd been holding his breath, and that there were tears mixed with the rain on his face. He approached slowly, almost afraid of breaking something sacred. Katherine sensed the footsteps and tilted her head slightly, waiting. Luke pulled his wallet from the inside pocket of his jacket, but his hands were shaking. It wasn't about the money. It never would be. He placed a few bills in her hat and crouched beside her. "Your voice is the most beautiful thing I've heard in years," he said, and his own voice came out hoarse, almost broken. Katherine smiled, a shy smile but genuine, and whispered a thank you that sounded like a prayer. "Do you sing here every day?" Luke asked, still crouching as if he were before something too fragile to be touched hastily. She nodded. "Always at this time. The city gets calmer after lunch. People walk more slowly. Sometimes they even stop." There was a sweet resignation in those words, but also a stubborn hope. Luke felt something stir inside him, something dormant, rusted, but still alive. Can I come back tomorrow to listen again?" She hesitated, not because she didn't want him to, but because there was something in his voice that frightened her, something too real. "You can," Katherine finally answered, and her smile widened a little more. Luke stayed there for a few more seconds, just looking at her, trying to understand how someone could carry so much light in the midst of so much darkness. He stood up, adjusted his wet jacket, and took 2 steps back, but he couldn't leave. Not yet. "What's your name?" he asked. "Katherine. Katherine Holland." He repeated the name mentally, as if he needed to engrave it somewhere safe inside himself. "I'm Luke." She nodded slightly, and he finally turned to leave. But as he walked away, Luke knew something had changed, irreversibly. Her voice kept echoing in his mind, not as a memory, but as a calling, as if something inside him had been awakened from a deep sleep and now refused to go back to sleep. He shoved his hands in his pockets, feeling the rain completely soak his $3,000 suit, and for the first time in years, he didn't care. Tomorrow, he would return. And the day after, too, and the next, because that voice, that woman, had something his entire empire couldn't buy. Luke came back the next day, and Katherine knew he would. There was something in his voice, a mixture of loneliness and searching, that she recognized well. It was the same tone her own voice carried when she sang on the hardest mornings. She heard him approaching before he even spoke, his footsteps firm but hesitant, like someone who wasn't sure if he was welcome. "I brought coffee," he said, and Katherine felt the warmth of the cup being placed in her hand. "I thought you might be cold." She smiled, wrapping her fingers around the warm paper. "Thank you. You didn't have to." "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to." They stayed there, side by side, as afternoon fell over Nashville. Luke sat on the ground next to her, not caring about his suit, this time a simpler one, as if he were trying not to stand out so much. Katherine took a sip of the coffee and tasted the sweetness. He'd added sugar. 2 packets, if she wasn't mistaken. Exactly how she liked it. "How did you know?" she asked, turning her face toward him. Luke shrugged, even knowing she couldn't see the gesture. "I guessed. Or maybe I just felt like you were the kind of person who finds sweetness even in bitter things." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens between people who are starting to truly know each other, when words are still being chosen carefully, but the heart already speaks louder. "You said yesterday that you work with music?" Katherine commented, breaking the silence. "Are you a producer? A songwriter?" Luke hesitated. "CEO of a music conglomerate. Record labels, publishers, some studios. Basically, I turn art into business." There was bitterness in those words, she noticed. "And do you like it?" He took a while to answer. "No, not anymore." Katherine turned completely toward him, and Luke had the strange feeling that, even without seeing, she saw him better than anyone in his life. "Then why do you do it?" The question was simple, but it pierced through layers he didn't even know existed. "Because I was good at it. Because it made money. Because I forgot there was another reason to make music." He ran his hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. "And then I heard you sing, and I remembered." She said nothing for a long moment. She just took another sip of coffee and let the silence do the work. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. "I lost my sight when I was 19. Bacterial meningitis. I woke up one day and the world had gone dark." Luke felt his chest tighten. "And music?" Katherine smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Music was the only thing that didn't need light to keep existing. I could still feel it. I could create it. And I realized that, in some strange way, losing my eyes made me see better what really mattered." Luke stayed silent, absorbing that. There was something deeply humbling and, at the same time, liberating about being next to someone who had lost so much and still carried more light than he'd ever had. "You're incredible, Katherine," he said, and the sincerity in his voice was almost painful. She laughed, a light laugh, almost shy. "I'm not. I'm just someone who learned to survive." "No," Luke insisted. "You're someone who learned to live. There's a difference." The sun was beginning to set, and Luke realized he'd spent more than an hour there, sitting on the cold ground beside her. And he didn't want to leave. For the first time in years, he didn't want to be anywhere else. Can I come back tomorrow?" he asked, almost afraid of the answer. Katherine tilted her head, the smile still playing on her lips. "Don't you get tired of hearing me sing?" Luke shook his head, even knowing she couldn't see it. "Never." And as he stood up and slowly walked away, Katherine stayed there, holding the empty coffee cup, feeling something strange and frightening grow inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time, something dangerously close to hope. The weeks turned into something neither of them had planned. Luke didn't just come back, he stayed. He brought coffee in the morning, sandwiches at lunchtime, and sometimes just his silent presence while Katherine sang. They talked about everything and nothing. About the city, about music, about the small miracles that happen when you stop running. And at some point, without either of them noticing exactly when, it stopped being just companionship. It became necessity. It became refuge. It became something that frightened as much as it warmed. It was Luke who suggested the walk in the park. "Just a stroll," he said, with that voice that tried to sound casual but betrayed his anxiety. "So you can breathe different air. Get away from the sidewalks for a bit." Katherine hesitated. Not because she didn't trust him. She did, and that was precisely what scared her. But Riley had warned her. "Be careful, Kath. Rich men don't take an interest in girls like us without wanting something in return." Still, Katherine accepted. because there was something about Luke's presence that made her want to believe that not everyone saw her blindness before they saw her. They walked slowly through Centennial Park, and Luke did something Katherine had never experienced before. He described the world. "The trees are starting to lose their leaves," he said, his voice almost reverent. "Some are golden, others are in a shade of orange that looks like fire. And when the wind blows, they dance in the air before touching the ground." Katherine held his arm, feeling the texture of the coat under her fingers, and smiled. Not because she was seeing, but because, for the first time, someone cared enough to paint the world with words just for her. "And the sky?" she asked, curious. Luke stopped walking and looked up. "The sky it's a soft pink mixed with shades of violet. The sun is going down slowly as if it doesn't want to leave. And there are thin clouds, almost transparent, that look like brush strokes." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "It's beautiful, but not as beautiful as you." Katherine felt her face grow warm. "Luke," he held her hand gently. "It's true. You don't need to see the sunset, Katherine. You are the sunset." They sat on a bench near the lake, and the silence returned, but this time charged with something different, something electric, something that pulsed between them like an unspoken promise. Luke intertwined his fingers with hers, and Katherine let him. She knew she was entering dangerous territory. She knew this could end in pain, but for the first time since losing her sight, she wanted to take the risk. She wanted to feel. She wanted to live something beyond survival. "Katherine," Luke began, and there was a vulnerability in his voice she'd never heard before. I don't know how to do this right. I don't know how to get close to someone without ruining everything. But with you, I want to try. I want to try to be someone better. Someone who deserves to be by your side." She turned her face toward him, her unseeing eyes fixed on some point beyond. "You don't need to be better, Luke. You just need to be real." He took a deep breath, as if he were about to jump off a cliff. "Then I'll be real. I'm falling in love with you." Katherine felt tears burn in her eyes. Not tears of sadness, tears of something too big to fit inside her. "Me too," she whispered, and her voice came out shaky, broken, but real. Luke pulled her close, wrapping her in an embrace that seemed to have been designed specifically for that moment. And there, in the middle of the park, as the sun finished setting and the first stars began to appear, Luke did something he hadn't done since he was 20. He sang. It wasn't a famous song. It was something simple, improvised, coming straight from his heart. And when he finished, he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion, "Will you be my girlfriend?" Katherine didn't answer with words. She simply raised her hand, touched his face gently, mapping every feature, every line, every vulnerability, and smiled. And that smile was the most beautiful answer Luke Murphy had ever received in his entire life. The following months were the happiest of Katherine's life. Luke took her to simple dinners at hidden restaurants, where she could just be Katherine, not the blind girl who sings on the street. They walked hand in hand through the streets of Nashville, and he continued describing the world to her. The shop windows, people's expressions, the colors that changed with the seasons. And her? She taught him to feel music again, to remember that art wasn't about profit. It was about connection. It was about soul. Until, on a seemingly ordinary night, everything changed. They were at Luke's apartment, a modern, minimalist space that Katherine had learned to navigate carefully. He was making dinner while she lightly touched the keys of the piano in the living room. "You know how to play?" he asked, surprised. Katherine smiled, shy. "A little. I learned before I lost my sight." Luke approached, wiping his hands on a dish towel, and sat beside her on the bench. "Play for me." And she played. A simple melody, but loaded with feeling.
And when she finished, Luke stayed silent for a long moment. Too long. Katherine started to feel uneasy. "Didn't you like it?" "No," he answered, his voice strangely serious. "I loved it. And I just had an idea." Katherine felt a knot in her stomach. She knew that tone. It was the executive tone. The tone of someone who had just seen a business opportunity. "What kind of idea?" she asked, cautious. Luke took her hands, enthusiastic. "Katherine, you have a gift, a real gift. And I have the resources, the contacts, the studios. We could record an album. Not something commercial, nothing that would force you to be what you're not, but something genuine, something that would take your voice beyond the sidewalks, to the whole world." He expected to see joy, expected to see gratitude. What he saw was fear. Katherine pulled her hands away and moved back, standing up from the piano bench. Her heart was racing, and she felt the walls of the apartment, so spacious and safe minutes ago, beginning to close in on her. "No," was all she could say. Luke blinked, confused. "No?" "Katherine, you don't understand. It's not about fame or money. It's about giving people the chance to hear what I hear every day. It's about—" "No," she repeated, louder this time, and her voice trembled. "I don't want that, Luke. I never did."
He stood up too, trying to understand. "But why? You have talent. You have a voice that could touch millions of—" "I don't care about millions," Katherine interrupted him, and now there were tears streaming down her face. "I sing on the streets because there I'm free, because there no one judges me, no one turns me into a product, no one expects me to be perfect." Her voice broke. "You think I don't know how the world works? You think I don't know that the second I step on a stage, all they'll see is the blind girl desperately trying to be relevant?" Luke felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "That's not it. I never—" "But that's what will happen," Katherine said, wiping away tears angrily. "And I can't take it, Luke. I can't take being exposed like that, being vulnerable for the whole world to see and judge." She was breathing heavily now, trying to calm herself. "On the streets, I control when I sing. I control who I sing for. But in a studio? On a stage? I lose everything. I lose myself." Luke stood still, processing. And for the first time, he truly understood. It wasn't about talent. It wasn't about opportunity. It was about survival. It was about protection. It was about someone who had already lost so much that the idea of exposing herself again was simply unbearable. He approached slowly, as if approaching something fragile. "Katherine?" he said, his voice soft. "I'm sorry. I was an idiot. I was so excited about the idea of sharing your voice that I didn't stop to think about what you really wanted." She didn't answer, just stood there, arms crossed over her chest in a defensive posture. Luke swallowed hard and said the only words that mattered. "I love you, Katherine. And I love you like this, exactly as you are. If you never want to sing for anyone but me in the sidewalks of Nashville, that's fine. If you only want to sing in the shower, that's fine. I didn't fall in love with you because of what you could become. I fell in love with who you already are." Katherine let out the breath she'd been holding, and her shoulders relaxed. She reached out her hand, searching for him, and Luke pulled her into a tight embrace. "Promise me?" she whispered against his chest. "Promise me you won't try to turn me into someone else." And Luke, his voice choked up, answered, "I promise." The proposal came on a quiet afternoon, 6 months after that difficult night at the apartment. They were sitting on the small couch in the house Katherine shared with Riley, and Luke was holding her hand differently, nervous, hesitant, as if he were about to ask the most important question of his life. And he was. "Katherine," he began, his voice trembling, "I know we've talked about this before, but I can't imagine my life without you. You taught me to feel again. You taught me that music isn't about stages or contracts, it's about truth." He paused, took a deep breath. "Will you marry me?" Katherine froze, Her heart raced in her chest, and she felt tears beginning to form in her eyes before she even fully processed what she just heard. "Luke, I know I'm a workaholic in recovery," he continued, laughing nervously. "I know I still make mistakes, that sometimes I get too excited about crazy ideas, but you make me want to be better. Not to impress anyone, but because you make me believe I can be better." He squeezed her hand. "So, what do you say? Will you spend the rest of your life listening to my pathetic attempts at singing in the shower?" She laughed, a laugh mixed with crying, with joy, with a relief so deep it seemed to wash away everything bad that had ever happened. "Yes," Katherine whispered, and then louder, with more certainty, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Luke pulled her into a tight embrace, and they stayed there, intertwined on the couch, while Riley, who had heard everything from the kitchen, appeared in the doorway with teary eyes and a huge smile on her face. "Welcome to the family, Luke," she said, and for the first time since that relationship began, her voice didn't carry suspicion. It carried something that looked a lot like approval. The following months were a sweet rush of preparations. Katherine insisted on a simple wedding at the small church she'd attended since childhood, the one where she'd learned to sing, where she'd found refuge in the darkest days after losing her sight. Luke agreed without hesitation. He would have married her anywhere, in the middle of the street if she wanted. What mattered wasn't the setting, it was the promise. Riley helped choose the dress, describing every detail to Katherine until she could see through her sister's words. And Luke spent weeks planning something special, something that would honor who Katherine truly was. The wedding day arrived on a golden spring morning. The church was decorated with simple flowers, daisies and lavender, chosen for their scent, not their appearance. Katherine could smell them in the air, mixed with the aroma of old wood and lit candles. She waited in the small vestibule of the church, the white dress flowing softly around her body, while Riley adjusted her veil. "You look beautiful, Kath," her sister whispered, her voice choked up. "So beautiful I can hardly believe you're my sister." Katherine smiled, squeezing Riley's hand. "I'm scared." "I know," Riley replied, "but it's a good kind of scared. It's the fear of starting something new." The music began, not the traditional wedding march, but a soft melody played on guitar, something Luke had chosen especially. Katherine held Riley's arm and began walking toward the altar. She counted the steps, as she always did, but this time not out of fear of getting lost. It was just a habit, because she knew, deep in her soul, that she was exactly where she should be. When she reached the altar, Riley placed her hand in Luke's, and Katherine felt the tremor in his fingers. He was nervous, and that made her smile. The pastor began the ceremony, but Katherine barely heard the words. She was feeling Luke's presence beside her, the warmth of his hand in hers, his breath mingling with hers. And when it was time for the vows, Luke spoke first, beautiful words about love, about partnership, about building a life together. But when it was Katherine's turn, she did something no one expected. She took the pastor's hand, asking to be excused, and turned completely toward Luke. "I'm not going to recite memorized vows," she said, her voice clear and firm. "I'm going to sing." Silence fell over the church like a sacred mantle. Even the children stopped fidgeting in the pews. Katherine took a deep breath, closed her eyes, not because she needed to, but it was her ritual, and began to sing. It wasn't a traditional song. It wasn't something anyone would recognize. It was something of hers, something she had composed in recent weeks in secret for this exact moment. The lyrics spoke of darkness and light, of loss and finding, of how true love doesn't need eyes to see. And every note that came from her throat was a promise, a surrender, a declaration that she was choosing, consciously, to let someone in, to let someone see her vulnerabilities, to let someone love her completely. When the last note finally dissolved into the air, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. Luke was crying openly, not caring who saw. Riley was crying, the pastor was crying, and Katherine was smiling,
because for the first time in years, she had sung not for survival, not for money, but for love. Pure, simple, and overwhelming love. The pastor, wiping his own eyes, finally managed to say, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." And when Luke kissed her, slowly and with reverence, Katherine knew she had made the right choice. The music finally belonged to them both, and more importantly, it belonged to herself. Life after the wedding brought a routine that neither of them had imagined, but both embraced with gratitude. Luke didn't turn Katherine into a star. He did something far more valuable. He created spaces where she could shine in her own way. Together, they founded Free Voices, a nonprofit organization that offered support to street artists, ensuring that talents hidden on sidewalks had access to instruments, lessons, and most importantly, dignity. It wasn't about turning them into products. It was about honoring art wherever it lived. Katherine continued singing on the streets of Nashville, but now Luke often sat beside her, sometimes picking up a guitar and accompanying her discreetly. They became a familiar presence in the historic downtown, the couple who proved that true love doesn't need spotlights to exist. And on the coldest afternoons, when they walked home hand in hand, Katherine knew she had found something no stage in the world could offer: freedom. The freedom to be loved exactly as she was, without needing to change, without needing to prove herself, without needing to be more than her own truth. Just as Katherine discovered that love can change everything without demanding you change who you are, each of us also carries that power of transformation within. True love doesn't forcefully mold us. It invites us to flourish. Stories like this remind us that it's never too late to start over, to trust again, and to believe that there's someone capable of seeing our light even when we doubt it ourselves. Genuine love doesn't transform us into something different. It reveals who we've always been beneath the fear. If this story touched you in some way, if you felt the power of being seen and loved for who you truly are, write in the comments, "Love transforms lives." We want to know how Katherine and Luke's journey resonated in your heart. Share with us your reflections, your own love stories that didn't need grand stages to be true. Because every story matters. Every voice deserves to be heard. Subscribe to Eternal Romance Stories and experience with each episode emotions that warm the soul and reflections that transform the heart. Here you'll find stories that celebrate love in its purest and truest form, the kind that accepts us, challenges us, and makes us believe it's worth feeling. Stories that prove real romance is in simple gestures, courageous choices, and the willingness to give yourself without fear of being who you truly are. And this was just one of many stories that will still move you here. Because where there is true love, there's always a new song waiting to be sung.